The city of Tigard, Oregon faced two problems. Motor vehicle traffic clogged its central business district. Meanwhile, as more buildings arose with their impervious concrete surfaces, rainwater runoff caused flooding. In order to reduce automobile traffic, the city planned sidewalks and bike paths. To address the flooding, the city required businesses to maintain at least 15% of their parcels as open space. The city also restricted development within the floodplain, preserving it as a greenway. Florence Dolan owned a store within the floodplain. Dolan wanted to double the size of her store and to pave her gravel parking lot. The city granted Dolan a building permit, subject to two conditions. It demanded that she deed all her land lying within the floodplain to the city to be used for its greenway and storm drainage system. The city also demanded an additional strip of land for a walkway and bicycle path to alleviate the additional traffic caused by the larger store. Altogether, the city demanded about 10% of her lot in exchange for her building permit. Dolan appealed these dedication requirements to the Land Use Board of Appeals. The board upheld both requirements. The Oregon Court of Appeals affirmed the board's decision, as did the Oregon Supreme Court. Dolan then sought United States Supreme Court review. The United States Supreme Court granted cert to consider whether the city's permit conditions were reasonably related to Dolan's expansion or whether they instead constituted an uncompensated taking in violation of the Fifth and 14th Amendments. Chief Justice Rehnquist ruled that the city's dedication requirements weren't sufficiently related to the asserted governmental interests and therefore violated the Fifth Amendment's takings clause. He was joined by Justices O'Connor, Scalia, Kennedy, and Thomas. Rehnquist first noted that the takings clause is designed to bar governments from forcing a few people alone to bear financial burdens that, in all fairness and justice, should be borne by the public as a whole. But governments do have the power to regulate land use, and the court previously held that, when a government conditions land use on the landowner's surrender of certain rights in that land, there must exist an essential nexus between the permit condition and a legitimate state interest. The court now considered how closely the condition had to relate to the asserted interest. Rehnquist concluded that the city's conditions had to bear a rough proportionality to the impact of Dolan's development plan. The court acknowledged that Dolan's expansion would create more impervious surface area, which would increase the risk of flooding. So, the city's open space requirement and its prohibition on development within the floodplain were both roughly proportional policy responses to the development's impact. However, the city's additional demands, that Dolan deed the land within the floodplain to the city and also deed additional land for a sidewalk and bike path, weren't roughly proportional. First, the city couldn't show that a publicly owned greenway was better for flood control than a privately owned greenway. Second, although Dolan's expanded store might cause more traffic, the remedial effect was too speculative to justify the city's demand to own that portion of Dolan's land. The court reversed the Oregon Supreme Court's decision. Justice John Paul Stevens vigorously dissented, joined by Justices Blackmun and Ginsburg. He argued that the impact of Dolan's expansion on traffic congestion and flooding would have justified the city's outright rejection of her expansion. Instead, the city approved it, subject to two reasonable conditions that mitigated its adverse effects. Stevens thought that the new rough proportionality standard was arbitrary and difficult to apply. Ultimately, when doubt exists regarding the magnitude of a development's impact, the public interest in averting that impact must outweigh commercial entrepreneurs' private interests. Stevens also criticized the fact that the court's new approach seemed to place the burden of proof on the government rather than on the private developer seeking to avoid the conditions. Governmental land use decisions had typically enjoyed a presumption of constitutionality. Therefore, Stevens would have upheld the city's conditions. Justice David Souter also dissented. He argued that the court claimed to create a new test, but really only applied the old essential nexus test from Nolan. Under the majority's test, Souter would have joined Justice Stevens in upholding the city's conditions. Dolan has been criticized by courts and academic commentators since it was released. Nevertheless, it continues to be an important pronouncement on the constitutionality of government exactions as a cost of applying for development permits.